Hello and welcome to this first session on mindfulness in science. My name is Dr. Asma Ahmed. I'm a senior lecturer in natural and applied sciences at Canterbury Christchurch University. Now, this first session is meant to be a very brief introduction to mindfulness. We'll talk about what mindfulness is and how it can potentially benefit you in your daily life and in your professional life as well. Before we move on to talk more about it, I'd like you to take a moment and ask yourselves this. If I could take a snapshot of your brain at any given moment, what would I find? Are you someone who dwells a lot in the past, reliving conversations, thinking about what someone said or didn't say, or what you should have said or you shouldn't have said? Are you someone who likes to make to-do lists all the time and thinking about the future, anticipating what's to come? Or are you more like this little girl in the picture, who's able to stay present in the moment, take in the sights, the sounds, the smells of what's happening, and just be completely rooted in the now? The question is your mind always full of thoughts? Or do you have moments in your day when you're mindful? Now, when I say mindfulness, I'm sure you already have some preconceived notions about it, or you've heard of it from someone else who's tried it. You might wonder if it's religious or spiritual. Is it about feeling good all the time? Is it about having no thought? And that sounds like a hard thing to do, doesn't it? To sit down and not think any thought. Is it only for a select few? And is it very complicated? But in fact, mindfulness is very simple. It's about being aware. It's about bringing your attention to the present moment. And it's about doing this in a non-judgmental way. And I say non-judgmental because our minds are very, very used to labeling every experience as good or bad, as wanted or unwanted. You might be in a place where you don't want to be anymore, or you might be doing something and wishing you were doing something else. But in mindfulness, we bring the attention back to what's happening, but we do not label it or judge it. We just watch in a neutral, non judgmental way. Now, you might be wondering why this is of any use at all. Maybe it sounds a bit boring to do. I'd rather be in the past or the future if the present moment is boring or uninteresting or unpleasant. But there's been a lot of research on mindfulness, and it has shown that not only does it impact people on a behavioral level, a consistent regular practice of mindfulness actually brings about structural changes in the brain and some very positive changes at that. It's been shown that mindfulness practices increase gray matter in the prefrontal cortex. Now, this is the area of the brain that's associated with learning, with memory, and with emotional regulation. So, if you were to practice mindfulness every day for a certain period of time, you will find that you're able to learn better, more efficiently, and more effectively. You're able to retain the information longer and more easily, and you have a more balanced response to what happens in your daily life. Mindfulness practices have also been shown to decrease brain cell volume in the amygdala. Now, the amygdala is the fear center, or the center that produces the flight or fight response in our body. A very useful center to have, or an active center in prehistoric times, because back then there was real physical danger, and it was very necessary for survival to have this kind of flight or fight response, to run away from predators, to fight for food, maybe to protect others. But these days, in this day and age, we don't have those kinds of physical dangers anymore. And yet, the amygdala is still pretty active. So what it does is it reacts the same way to perceived danger or threat. And that could change, could be as innocuous as someone having to go on stage and give a performance, or stand up in class and give a little presentation, Or maybe someone's asked you a question and you don't know the answer to it. Any of these situations can cause the same kind of fear and anxiety in our bodies. You might feel your heart racing, you might find that you're sweating, or you feel like just getting up and running away from there. These aren't real dangers to our physical safety, but the mind still perceives them as real dangers. And the amygdala produces the same kind of fear and anxiety in our bodies. But a consistent practice of mindfulness can actually dial down the response of the amygdala and fine tune it. In other words, it gives back the control to the prefrontal cortex and prevents these kinds of reactions. It prevents knee jerk reactions. Sometimes you might find that you're saying something that you didn't mean to say. That's because you weren't completely rooted in that present moment. There's been a lot of research in this area. If you're interested, there are papers that you can read on how mindfulness practices affect people on the behavioral level and also bring about changes in the brain structure. Now, from this, I'm sure you've already started to think about how it can benefit you in your daily life. If you're a student of science, you do need to have a high degree of attention and a good memory to be able to retain the concepts you've learned. You need to be able to perform well in maybe a practical setting where you're conducting experiments, you're observing what's happening and you're analyzing your results. All of these tasks and activities require a certain degree of attention and memory and a certain degree of effectiveness for you to succeed. And mindfulness practice can actually help you with these things. It can help you become more effective. There was a recent study in Harvard that showed that on an average, human beings spend 47% of their waking time either in the past or the future, either reliving the past or anticipating the future. Can you imagine that? The implication of that is we're absent mentally for about half the time that we're awake, which means it takes us that much longer to get things done. As students, it would take you that much longer to understand a concept and to retain it, or you might have to redo experiments in the lab because you didn't get it right the first time. So, overall, we're not very effective as human beings because we're not present completely and mentally in what's happening. And of course, all of us have had issues with stress and anxiety at some point or another. And as students, this is something that you have to deal with quite often because you might be staying away from family, you might be undergoing a lot of stress just because of the stress of exams, and just coping with everyday life and being independent and being on your own. Of course, the coronavirus lockdown hasn't made things any easier. It's been tough on everyone, being cut off from family and friends and being isolated. So it's put a lot of emotional strain on everyone pretty much. So a practice of mindfulness can actually help us deal with these kinds of situations better as well. As I said, it helps with emotional regulation, it helps reduce stress and anxiety. And there has also been a lot of work related to mindfulness and how it affects depression and helps treat depression quite effectively. I've compiled, 2 or 3 resources here if you're more interested in how mindfulness helps and how it can change your brain. Then, these are a couple of websites and papers that you can take a look at. But in the next session, I'm going to talk about the tools and techniques that you can actually try and use in your life, which will benefit you in the long run. That's it from me for this session, and I hope I've created an interest in mindfulness in your minds and that you would like to know more about it. And I will see you in the next session. Bye-bye.